Changing Society, First Nations People by Penelope. First Nations People. The First Nations people have inhabited Canada for over 12,000 years, and in fact, the name Canada comes from the native word Kanata. Canada wasn't very kind to First Nations people, however, and today I will highlight some of the injustice they have faced, as well as the successes. Please enjoy. What were the important events for First Nations people? 1890 to 1900. The Sundance was banned, and this is a photo of the Sundance. The establishment of Treaty 8, and this is sort of a reimagining of the establishment of Treaty 8. And the Klondike Gold Rush. 1901 to 1914. The establishment of Treaty 9 and 10. Report on health conditions in residential schools, and the Oliver Act. Who were the people involved? 1890 to 1900. The Sundance is a ceremonial dance performed by the Plains First Nations, which was forbidden from being performed by the 1885 Indian Act. When the act was abolished in 1951, many people could go back to performing the dance. Establishing Treaty 8. Treaty 8 was an agreement signed by Queen Victoria and the First Nations of Lesser Slave Lake. The treaty was signed in 1899 in modern-day Gouard, Alberta. The Klondike Gold Rush. When gold was found in the North, and the North was a place where many First Nations people lived and many settlers did not want to travel, but when gold was found, many settlers would come from afar to prospect. This understandably annoyed and disrupted many of the First Nations people already living in the area. This resulted in many treaty negotiations being discussed. 1901 to 1914. Establishing Treaty 9 and 10. Treaty 9 was established in 1905 by the Canadian government, Ojibwe, and Cree people. It was the first time the government took an active role in negotiations. Treaty 10 was established in 1906 by King Edward VIII and the First Nations band governments of Saskatchewan and some parts of Alberta. Report on health conditions in residential schools. In 1907, a report was released by Dr. P. H. Bryce, in which he conducted a survey of 15 residential schools. The results were shocking. The death rate of the students was 24%, and may have been higher if he had observed the institutions for a longer period of time. The response from the Deputy Superintendent of Indian Affairs, D.C. Scott, was that the church was at fault for not understanding how to run the schools. The Oliver Act. Much of the land owned by First Nations people was starting to gain value, so the Oliver Act was put in place to remove any First Nations within reserves close to a town or city with more than 8,000 people. Frank Oliver, Minister of the Interior, was empowered to do this. As of now. Modern day. First Nations people now have the right to vote, live wherever they want, and so much more. Native language is also commonly taught in schools. However, many First Nations people still face injustice and racism to this day. Thank you for watching, and these are my sources.